My grandfather drew maps the way other men prayed quietly, alone, and with the absolute conviction that the act itself held back the dark. I didn't understand that until the morning the dark arrived. My name is Oren Caldecott. I was 26 years old. 3 semesters into a civil engineering master's I couldn't afford, living above my grandfather's garage in Brannock, population 4,100, the kind of southern Ohio town where every third building stood empty and every second conversation was about leaving. I came back because the funding dried up. I told people I came back to help him with the house. Both were true, and neither was the real reason. And the real reason is part of this story, so I'll get to it. But first, the maps. My grandfather's name was Prosper Caldecott, 79 years old that spring. Retired county highway superintendent. 41 years walking every culvert, grading every shoulder, approving every patch of asphalt in a 3-county radius. He knew the roads the way a surgeon knows a rib cage, not just the anatomy, but the history of every scar. After he retired, he didn't stop. He walked. He drove his rust-orange Dodge truck at 14 miles an hour with his window down, and he drew. Not on a computer, not with GPS. He drew on vellum and mechanical pencil at a drafting table he'd built from a door and 2 sawhorses in the sunroom off the kitchen. The maps covered the walls. They covered the hallway. They filled 11 flat file drawers in the basement. Every map was dated. Every map was titled. And every map was annotated in his crabbed engineer's hand with notes no sane cartographer would bother recording. Bridge weight limit posted 12 tons. Actual capacity 8 tons. South footing cracked since '09. Ditch on Vollmer Road floods at 2 inches rain. Passable only from east approach. Gate at Harshaw Farm unlocked. Owner dead since March. Dog still loose. I thought it was retirement dementia dressed up in useful clothes. I was wrong about that. And I was wrong about a lot of things. And this story is mostly about the distance between what I assumed and what was actually in front of me. The first Monday of June, I came down to the kitchen at 6 in the morning and found him at the drafting table with his coffee cold and his pencil still moving. He'd been up all night. The map in front of him was different from the others. It was larger 3 sheets of vellum taped together, and it showed every road within a 20-mile radius of our house, not just the county roads, the farm tracks, the utility easements, the creek fords, the deer trails he'd walked on his own legs. And across the top, in red pencil, a title I'd never seen him use before. Movement Routes Brannock Township Final. "You're up early," I said. He didn't look at me. "Sit down, Oren. I have a shift at..." "Sit down." I sat. He pushed his reading glasses up and turned the map so I could see it. Every road was drawn in black, clean, and precise. But over the black lines, he'd laid a second network in blue. Alternate routes, bypasses, cut-throughs I'd never heard of. And at 7 points around the edge of the map, circled in red, destinations. A grain elevator, a quarry, a water tower, a church, a fire station, 2 farms. "These are waypoints," he said. "If you can't take the primary, you take the blue. If the blue is gone, you walk the drainage and you count your steps." "Waypoints for what?" He looked at me then. And I want to be precise about what I saw, because I've spent years thinking about it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was the expression of a man who had finished a very long calculation and didn't like the answer. "For getting out," he said. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I did. He folded the map carefully, slid it into a cardboard tube, wrote my name on the cap, and set it on the table between us. "Keep this in your truck," he said, "behind the seat, not in the bed. Granddad, this is the last thing I'm going to ask you to do that doesn't make sense yet. After today, Everything I ask will make sense immediately, and you'll wish it didn't." He stood and poured his cold coffee down the sink and walked outside to his garden. I put the tube in my truck. I don't know why. Maybe because he'd never asked me for anything in a voice like that before. Maybe because the red pencil bothered me. By Wednesday, I understood. By Thursday, I'd have followed that map through the center of the earth. Tuesday morning started with a sound I still can't name properly. I was under my truck in the driveway, replacing a tie rod end, when my phone buzzed against the concrete. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Then the county emergency siren wound up the tornado siren on the water tower 3 blocks south and held. Not the cycling wail for weather. A single, sustained tone. I rolled out from under the truck. My phone showed 11 missed alerts, all from the same federal system, all identical. Civil authority alerts: stay indoors. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals, further instructions to follow. The siren kept holding. I walked to the backyard. My grandfather was kneeling in his raised beds, pulling spent lettuce bolts. He didn't look up. "Granddad, the siren." "I hear it." "Your phone." "I left it inside." "There's a federal alert, civil authority, symptomatic individuals." He pulled another bolt, shook the dirt off the roots, and dropped it into his bucket. "Go inside and fill every container we own with water. Bathtub first, then the pots, then the jars in the basement. Don't use the hot tap, it'll drain the water heater. We'll need that tank." "For what?" He stood then, and his knees cracked, and he winced, and I saw for the first time that his hands were trembling. Not from age, from something he'd been holding down. "Oren, fill the water. Then come find me. I'll be in the sunroom." I filled the water. Every pot, every jar, the bathtub, the utility sink in the basement. It took 40 minutes. When I came to the sunroom, he had the drafting table cleared except for a single sheet, a close-up of the 6 blocks around our house. Every building labeled, every fence drawn, every gap in every hedge marked. "Our neighbor Emmeline is 91, he said, pointing. "She doesn't drive. Her phone is a landline. She won't have gotten the alert." "You want me to go tell her?" "I want you to walk there, knock, and if she answers normally, bring her here. If she doesn't answer normally, come back." "What does normally mean?" He set his pencil down. "It means she's standing and talking, and her eyes look right." I stared at him. The siren was still holding outside. One long note that had stopped sounding like an emergency and started sounding like furniture, a permanent fixture of the air. "There was a briefing," he said. 3 days ago, Highway Superintendent's Network, the old one, from the state DOT mutual aid chain. Retired members still on the relay. A man from Columbus read a prepared statement. He asked us not to share it publicly because they were still confirming. He picked the pencil up, set it down again. "The confirmed cases are in Cleveland and Dayton. Moving south." "Cases of what?" "Of the dead not staying dead." I didn't laugh this time. His face wouldn't let me. I walked to Emmeline's. Her front door was open 3 inches. I knocked and said her name. I heard something inside, not words, but a sound. Wet and guttural, a sound I'd never heard a person make. Through the gap I saw the hallway wallpaper, a framed photo on the floor, glass cracked, and past the frame, at the end of the hall, a shape that was standing, but not standing right. Its weight was wrong. It listed like a fence post in soft ground, and its head moved before its shoulders, and I could see it. I could see the surface of its eyes, even in the dim hall. They caught the daylight from the door like a film of grease on still water. I stepped back. The shape rotated toward the sound of my shoe on the porch board. It took one step forward, and the step was wrong, too deliberate, too mechanical, like a limb remembering a function it no longer fully controlled. I pulled the door shut. I held the knob until I heard the latch click. Then I walked home, and I didn't run because running felt like it would make it real. And I wasn't ready for it to be real. My grandfather was standing on the back porch. He looked at my face. "She wasn't herself," I said. He nodded. "There's someone in her house." "It's her." "It can't be her." "It's her, Oren." He opened the screen door. "Come inside. We have work to do, and the roads are open now, but they won't be by dark." He was right about that. He was right about everything that day. And the only thing I did right was listen. By noon, the siren had stopped, and the silence it left behind was worse. My grandfather worked through it. He moved through the house with the unhurried efficiency of a man ticking items off a list he'd written years ago. He filled the truck. Water jugs, tools, a come-along winch, a hand-crank radio, a first aid kit that was better stocked than anything I'd seen outside an ambulance. 2 5-gallon fuel cans, already full, a chainsaw, a bow saw, rope, tarps, a box of vellum maps in labeled tubes. "How long have you had these packed?" I asked. "The fuel I rotate every 60 days. Everything else, 18 months. 18 months. Since the briefing network started circulating the veterinary reports." I didn't ask what veterinary reports. I was past asking questions that would slow us down. I helped him load, and I noticed he moved well for 79, deliberate, hips low, hands sure. He'd always moved like that, but I'd coded it as old man caution. Now I understood it was competence, practiced, maintained competence. "We need 2 more people," he said, standing by the tailgate. "Your aunt won't answer. I've tried 4 times. That means she either left already or she can't answer. Either way, she's beyond what I can do from here." He said it flat, not cold flat, the way a doctor reads a chart. His sister, my great-aunt Harriet, who lived in Dayton, who lived in one of the 2 cities he'd named. So the 2 people. First, Palmer Goss, 3 blocks north, the yellow house behind the feed co-op. He was my chain crew foreman for 20 years. He's got bad lungs, but he knows every bridge rating in the county, and he can change a tire in the dark. Second, Nesta Ruiz. She works the desk at the grain elevator on Dwyer Road. She called me this morning. She's locked herself in the scale house, and she can see the lot from the window. You've already talked to her. She's on the highway relay. She's the one who took the Columbus briefing notes. I absorbed this. My grandfather had a network. A quiet, analog, retired county employee network that had been tracking this for months, and he'd never mentioned it. And I'd been living above his garage thinking he was drawing maps for therapy. "I'll get Palmer," I said. "Take the truck. Don't honk. If Palmer doesn't come to the door in 2 minutes, leave. Don't go inside." I drove 3 blocks north. Brannock looked wrong in the way a familiar face looks wrong when the expression doesn't match the context. Lawns mowed, flowers blooming, a sprinkler running in the Ottinger yard. But no one visible. Not one person on a porch, not one car moving. The sprinkler swept back and forth across an empty sidewalk, and the sound of the water was the loudest thing in the world. Palmer Goss opened his door before I knocked. He was 68, wire-thin, breathing audibly through his nose. He carried a canvas bag and a walking stick. "Prosper sent you," he said. "Yes, sir." "I've been ready since 4. He locked his door, pocketed the key, and walked to the truck. At the passenger side, he paused and looked up the street. Ottinger's didn't shut off the water. I noticed. Millie Ottinger hasn't missed a water bill in 30 years. He climbed in and pulled the door shut. Let's go. I drove back. My grandfather had Palmer's chair already set up on the porch, a lawn chair with a cushion, because he knew Palmer's back. The two men shook hands without smiling, and Palmer unrolled a highway map from his bag and spread it over the porch rail. And they began comparing notes, pencil to pencil, in a language of bridge numbers and culvert ratings and road grades that I followed only in outline. The Vollmer Bridge is out, Palmer said. Been out since the spring flood. They haven't repaired it. I have a ford a quarter-mile upstream, passable below 2 feet. Current depth? 14 inches yesterday. I checked. Palmer looked at him. You checked the water depth yesterday. I check it every week. Palmer was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a red pen from his pocket and marked something on my grandfather's map. And the two men kept working. And I stood at the edge of the porch watching the empty street and listening for any sound that wasn't the Ottinger sprinkler. None came. The silence held. And somewhere inside it, the thing that had been Emmeline was still standing in her hallway, turning toward sounds that no longer reached it. We left for Nesta Ruiz at 2 p.m. My grandfather rode shotgun with the map tube across his lap, unrolled to the quadrant showing the east side of town. Palmer sat in the back seat, his canvas bag between his feet, counting his breaths the way a man counts money he might not have enough of. The drive to the grain elevator on Dwyer Road was 8 blocks through Brannock's commercial strip. Every business was closed. The traffic light at Main and Dwyer was cycling green, yellow, red for no one. A dog trotted down the center line with its tail low, glanced at the truck, and kept going. Drive past the Methodist church first, my grandfather said. That's 2 blocks out of the way. Drive past it. I drove past it. The parking lot held 9 cars, doors closed, arranged neatly in the painted spaces. The church doors were open. From inside came no sound, no light, no movement. Just the open doors, and the parked cars, and the terrible neatness of it all. People who had driven there for help and found something else. Don't slow down, my grandfather said, and I didn't. At the grain elevator, the lot was empty except for a white county truck parked against the scale house. The scale house was a single-story concrete block building with a window facing the truck scale and a steel door on the east side. I saw the edge of a face behind the window glass. My grandfather rolled his window down. Nesta, it's Prosper. The steel door opened 4 inches. A woman's voice, low and controlled. Who's driving? My grandson, Oren. Who's in the back? Palmer Goss. The door opened. Nesta Ruiz stepped out, pulled the door shut behind her, and crossed the lot in 6 paces. She was maybe 55, compact, dark hair pulled tight, wearing the kind of steel-toed boots that meant she spent her days around machinery. She carried a backpack and a clipboard. She got in the back seat next to Palmer, set the clipboard on her knees, and said, There are 4 of them in the processing building. They came through the loading bay around 8 this morning. They're not fast, but the bay door is jammed open, and they're between us and the county road east. We're not going east, my grandfather said. Good. She flipped the clipboard around. It held a printout, a list of names, addresses, and single-word status notes. Some names were crossed out. Some were circled. Most had no mark at all. The relay, my grandfather said. Last update was 11. Columbus stopped transmitting at 9. Chillicothe went silent at 10:15. Everything north is gone. Everything west is quiet. But that probably means their sirens are broken, not that they're fine. Palmer leaned forward to read the list. How many circled? Circled means confirmed alive and able. 14 as of this morning. Crossed out means confirmed dead or turned. 22. She paused. The rest didn't answer. I pulled out of the lot and turned south, following my grandfather's finger on the map. He traced a blue line, one of his alternate routes, that ran along a drainage easement behind the elementary school and connected to a farm track leading to the county highway. Why south? I asked. Because south takes us to Calloway's land. Calloway has a barn with a concrete floor, a deep well with a hand pump, and a line of sight in every direction for a quarter mile. That's where we start. Start what? He looked at the map, not at me. Start collecting. I understood then. The map wasn't an escape plan. It was a rescue plan. The waypoints weren't bolt holes for us to hide in. They were collection points, places where survivors could be gathered, held, and moved. The blue lines weren't retreat routes. They were arteries, connecting scattered people to a central system. My grandfather hadn't spent 18 months mapping an exit. He'd spent 18 months mapping a living circulation, and we were the first blood moving through it. How many can we fit? Palmer asked. Calloway's barn holds 40 if they sleep close. We have 4. We have 4 right now. Nesta made a mark on her clipboard. She wrote our names, all 4, at the top of a fresh page. A new list. A living one. The drainage easement was narrow and wet. Branches scraped the truck's mirrors. I drove at walking speed, following ruts that existed on my grandfather's map, but not in any database. He'd drawn this road from memory, from walking it. Turn here, he said, through the gap in the fence. The wire's been down since November. He was right. The wire was down. The gap was exactly where he'd drawn it. And for the first time since the siren, I felt something other than fear. I felt the terrifying weight of a man who had been right about everything. And the question that weight carried. What else was he right about that I hadn't heard yet? Calloway's farm sat in a shallow basin of mown pasture with a white barn, a stone house, and a windmill that creaked in the afternoon heat. The barn doors were open. The house doors were closed. Nothing moved in the yard. My grandfather told me to stop 50 yards out. He studied the house through the windshield for a full minute without speaking. Palmer, can you see the kitchen window? Palmer leaned between the seats. Curtains are drawn. They were open yesterday. Nesta checked her clipboard. Calloway, Virgil. Status, no answer since Monday. My grandfather opened his door. Stay here, all of you. I'll go, I said. You don't know the property. You're 79. And I know where the cellar hatch is and which porch board squeaks. Stay here. He walked across the yard with the map tube in one hand and the other hand empty. And I watched him move with that low, deliberate gait. And I understood something new about the way he walked. It wasn't caution, it was quietness. He'd trained himself to be quiet. His boots made no sound on the gravel. His weight shifted without jolting. He reached the porch, skipped the 3rd step, and went to the kitchen window. He pulled the curtain aside with one finger, looked in, let the curtain fall, crossed to the barn, looked inside, came back to the truck. Virgil's in the kitchen, he said, sitting at the table. He's turned. The flatness again, the chart-reading voice. The barn is clear. Clean water in the trough, hand pump works, loft has hay bales we can sleep on. We'll use the barn. We'll seal the house. Seal it how? I asked. We don't go in. We wire the doors shut from the outside. Virgil stays where he is. He's sitting. He's not moving toward anything. If we leave him alone, he'll stay. Palmer exhaled slowly. That's cold, Prosper. That's correct. Virgil weighs 230 pounds, and he's between us and the only interior staircase. I'm not clearing a room I don't have to clear. He unrolled a section of map on the hood. We work from the barn. The first blue road runs north to the Demler place. The second runs west to the Hollister Bridge. Nesta, what's your last contact with the Demler family? Annabeth Demler answered the relay at 6 this morning. She's got her 2 boys and a neighbor. That's 7 more. Palmer, what's the Hollister Bridge rated at? Posted 10 tons, actual maybe 6. The truck weighs 4,200. We cross it once. Oren, you'll drive the north route tomorrow at first light. I looked at him. Alone. With the map. You won't need anything else for the Demler run. Annabeth knows the relay signal. 3 honks, pause, 1 honk. She'll open her gate. I wanted to argue. But Nesta was already writing on the clipboard, and Palmer was tracing the blue line north with his finger. And my grandfather was standing in the last light of a June afternoon on a dead man's farm, planning a living system. And the 3 of them moved together with a coordination that told me this conversation had been rehearsed not in words, but in decades of shared understanding about roads and weather and the weight a bridge can bear. We sealed the house. I wired the front and back doors with baling wire from the barn, while Palmer watched the windows and Nesta swept the barn's interior, checking stalls and grain bins. In the loft, we found hay, horse blankets, a battery lantern, and a box of canning jars filled with tomatoes and green beans. Virgil Calloway's wife's work, probably. She died 2 years ago. The jars were still sealed, still good. My grandfather climbed the loft ladder slowly, 1 rung at a time, and sat on a hay bale and unrolled the master map across the floor. By lantern light, the blue lines glowed like veins. Tomorrow you take the north route, he said. The day after, Palmer rides with you on the west route. Nesta monitors the relay from here. The hand crank can reach the repeater on the water tower if the atmospheric's right. And you? He smoothed a crease in the vellum. I'll be here, drawing. Drawing what? The routes change. A road that was open this morning might be blocked tonight. A ford that was 14 inches could be 20 after rain. The map is never finished. It's only current. He said it like scripture. And I laid my sleeping bag on the hay and listened to his pencil scratching in the lantern light. And outside, somewhere in the stone house, Virgil Calloway sat at his own kitchen table in the dark, and the windmill creaked, and the stars came out over a county that was emptying itself of the living. I drove the north route at dawn. The map was unrolled on the passenger's seat, held flat by the first aid kit and a water jug. My grandfather had marked the route in blue, with red annotations at every potential obstruction. A fallen oak reported last winter, a stretch of soft shoulder near the creek, a blind curve where the county had never cut the sumac back. The road was 2 lanes of cracked asphalt running through second-growth timber and tobacco field margins. No cars, no people. The morning light came through the trees at a low angle that turned the road into a corridor of long shadows, and every shadow could have been something standing in the ditch. At the first red annotation, the fallen oak, I found the road clear. Someone had chainsawed the trunk to the shoulder. My grandfather had noted this as a possibility. Likely cleared by timber crew or neighbor. Confirm visually. Do not assume. At the second, the soft shoulder, I slowed and kept left. The right side had eroded into a muddy slot. Passable, but only because I'd been told to avoid it. At the third, the blind curve, I stopped. 50 yards past the sumac thicket, a pickup truck sat crosswise in both lanes. Its doors were open. The engine was off. A duffel bag lay in the road, unzipped, clothes spilling out. Someone had abandoned it mid-flight. I checked the map. My grandfather had drawn a dotted bypass, a gravel farm track that peeled off the road 30 yards before the curve, looped through a hayfield, and reconnected past the obstruction. I'd have missed it entirely. The track entrance was hidden behind a stand of locust trees, marked on the map with a small pencil note. Fenton lease gate wired, not locked. Lift and swing. I found the gate. I lifted and swung. The track was rough but solid, and it brought me back to the asphalt, 100 yards past the abandoned truck. I could see in the rear-view mirror that the truck's dome light was still on, the battery draining. Nobody coming back to turn it off. The Demler place was a white clapboard farmhouse with a chain-link run for dogs and a metal barn. I pulled to the gate and honked. 3, pause, 1. A curtain moved. Then a woman stepped onto the porch with a deer rifle at low port. "Who sent you?" she called. "Prosper Caldecott." She lowered the rifle. "How's his hip?" I didn't know my grandfather had a bad hip. He didn't mention it. That sounds right. She set the rifle against the porch rail and waved me in. Annabeth Demler was 60, long-faced and precise in the way of people who'd spent their lives managing livestock and weather. Her 2 sons, Kiefer and Breck, were in their 30s, Kiefer lean and watchful, Breck broad, and carrying a shotgun he handled like he'd been born with it. The neighbor was a woman named Lenora Tupp, mid-40s, a postal carrier who'd been on her route when the alert hit and had walked 4 miles through the back fields to the Demler gate. "I couldn't go home," Lenora said. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her mail satchel still over her shoulder. My street was, there were people in the road who weren't right. Walking in circles, I saw Mrs. Haddix, and she was I delivered to her yesterday. She was fine yesterday. Annabeth made coffee on a camp stove. We drank it standing in the kitchen while Kiefer watched the windows. "Prosper's plan," Annabeth said. "He talked about it last winter. I thought he was being dramatic." "He was being precise," I said. "Same thing with Prosper." I spread the map on her table and showed her the route back to Calloway's barn. She studied it with the same focused silence. My grandfather used reading the terrain, counting the turns, measuring distance by the marks. "We can take 2 vehicles," she said. "My truck and Lenora's car. Lenora, you still have gas?" "3/4. We go in convoy. Oren leads. Kiefer takes rear in our truck. Breck rides with me. Lenora, you carry the supplies." She organized it in 90 seconds. No argument, no negotiation. She and my grandfather had worked from the same book for decades. The roads were the grammar, and the map was the sentence. And they both read it the same way. We left at 7. 3 vehicles, 7 people. The map held. Every turn was where it should be, every hazard marked, every bypass confirmed. When we pulled into Calloway's yard, my grandfather was standing at the barn door with his pencil behind his ear. He counted the vehicles, counted the people, made a mark on the map I couldn't read from the truck. Then he looked at me and nodded once. And that was worth more than anything anyone had ever said to me. By the end of the 3rd day, we were 14. The Demler group made 8. Palmer's morning run on the west route brought back a husband and wife, the Pettigrews, Earl and June, who'd been hiding in their storm cellar with a transistor radio and a case of canned peaches. Nesta's relay raised a voice from the south. A man named Caldencott, a retired school bus mechanic who'd barricaded himself inside the bus garage at the district maintenance yard with 2 teenage girls he'd pulled off the road. We couldn't reach Ferry by the primary route. Nesta's relay contact told us the Marshfield intersection was choked with abandoned cars and at least a dozen of the turned, milling in a loose cluster around the wreckage of a collision. My grandfather unrolled the map, found a blue line, a utility road easement that ran behind the water treatment plant, and sent me south with Breck Demler riding shotgun. Breck was quiet. He held the shotgun across his knees and watched the tree line and didn't ask questions. When I turned onto the easement, he checked the rear view and said, "2 behind us, walking, not fast." I looked. 2 figures on the road we'd just left, maybe 100 yards back. They weren't running. They moved with that mechanical wrongness I'd seen at Emmeline's, each step a fraction too deliberate, as if the muscles were operating on a delayed instruction. They were facing our direction, but not tracking us precisely. Their heads swiveled, scanning like radar dishes without a lock. "Don't stop," Breck said, calmly, as if he'd already internalized the rules. I didn't stop. The easement road was dirt, rutted, hemmed by scrub. My grandfather's map noted, "Passable in dry weather. Soft at low point near culvert, stay right. Chain link gate at plant boundary combination 4417, set by utility crew 16, unchanged." The combination worked. We passed the water treatment plant empty, humming on backup generators, doing its job for a town that no longer needed clean water, and connected to the service road that reached the bus garage. Caldencott opened the bay door when I gave the relay signal. He was 70, barrel-chested, with grease-stained hands and the kind of calm that comes from decades of fixing things that other people gave up on. The 2 girls, Tessa and Maeve, 16 and 15, sisters, had been walking to a friend's house when the turns started appearing in their neighborhood. Ferry had been driving past in a bus he was road testing. He'd opened the door. "That's it," he said. "I just opened the door." Didn't think about it. Heard them screaming and opened the door. We loaded them into the truck. Tessa sat rigid, silent, her hands pressed between her knees. Maeve talked a rapid, fractured stream of detail about what she'd seen. The mailman walking in a circle in the Beekman yard. The Beekman dog barking until it wasn't barking anymore. The sound the mailman made when he stopped circling and started toward the sound. "It's like they hear a specific thing," Maeve said. "Not just noise, specific noise, like a voice or an engine or something alive." I filed this. My grandfather would want to know. We drove back on the same easement, and the 2 figures from the road were gone. Not gone as in they'd wandered off, gone as in they were now standing at the chain link gate we'd passed through, facing inward, motionless, as if they'd followed the sound of our passing to its last known point and simply stopped there to wait. "They tracked us," Breck said. "They tracked the truck." "Same thing." I drove past them at 15 miles an hour. They didn't react to the visual. When I accelerated, both heads turned. One took a step toward the sound. The other stayed still. I watched in the mirror as they shrank, 2 dark marks against the green, patient as stones. At Calloway's barn, my grandfather listened to Maeve's account without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. Did the mailman turn toward the dog first, or the Beekman girl? The dog. It was barking. He made a note on the map's margin. I leaned over and read it. Priority target, sustained sound over visual. Implications for vehicle use. Confirm. He was treating this the way he'd treated road conditions for 40 years. Observation, annotation, confirmation. The dead were a hazard, a weather pattern, a flood, a bridge failure, and he was mapping them with the same patient precision he'd mapped every pothole and blind curve in 3 counties. And I began to understand that precision was how he loved the world. That night, we held our first count. My grandfather insisted on it. Everyone in the barn, seated on hay bales or standing against the stalls, while Nesta read the names off her clipboard, and each person raised a hand. Prosper Caldecott. Here. Oren Caldecott. Here. Palmer Goss. Palmer raised his hand and coughed twice, the sound wet and deep. Nesta Ruiz. Present. Annabeth Demler. Here. It went on through all 14. The names filled the barn the way the lantern filled it with light. Warm, bounded, sufficient. When Nesta finished, my grandfather stood. "This is the list," he said. "I'll read it every night. Not because you might forget who you are, but because I won't. Everyone in this barn has a name. And a name means you count. If a name stops being answered, I carry it anyway. That's not negotiable." No one argued. Tessa, who hadn't spoken since we'd picked her up, was crying silently, and Maeve had her arm around her. And June Pettigrew was holding a canning jar of green beans she'd opened for dinner, and her hands were shaking. And I looked at these 14 people sitting in a dead man's barn on a map my grandfather had drawn, and I thought, this is what it looks like when someone refuses to stop counting. The relay brought fragments through the night. Nesta monitored the hand-crank radio in 2-hour shifts, and the voices that reached us were thin and broken, a woman in Shawnee County asking if anyone could hear. A man on a CB band repeating coordinates that didn't match any map we had. A recording on a loop from a station in Columbus that said, "Shelter in place," in a voice that sounded like it had been recorded when "shelter in place" still meant something. "Columbus is gone," Nesta said at the midnight shift change. She said it to my grandfather alone, but I was awake in the loft and heard it through the hay. I know. The relay chain broke at 11. Nobody south of us is transmitting. That means we're the edge. Prosper. If we're the edge, there's nothing behind us. There's what we build. That's always behind us. I heard her sit down heavily. You mapped this. You mapped an escape route for the whole town, and the town didn't listen. Some listened. 14 listened. 14 out of 4,000. 14 who are alive and in this barn. That's not a fraction. That's a number. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "What's tomorrow's route?" He unrolled the map. I heard the vellum crinkle. "Tomorrow we take the east leg. There's a family the relay mentioned before it broke, name of Eldrin, out past the quarry. 3 people. Nesta, I need you to raise them at first light. If you can't raise them, we go anyway and check. And if they're turned, then we mark the house and we keep driving." I lay in the dark and listened to the pencil. He was drawing a new route, adjusting for the figures Breck and I had seen at the gate, recalculating based on what Maeve had told him about sound. The blue lines shifted. The map evolved. It was alive in his hands, the way a river is alive, always the same thing, never the same shape. Palmer's cough woke me before dawn. He was sitting up on his hay bale, doubled over, his breathing a thin whistle. Annabeth brought him water. He drank, coughed, drank again. "Don't tell Prosper," he said. "He already knows," Annabeth said. "He's known your lungs since 1989. Then don't let him change the route on my account." "Palmer, he planned the route around your lungs 2 months ago. Why do you think the western leg is the shortest?" Palmer stared at her. Then he laughed, a wheezing, startled laugh that turned into another cough. and Annabeth rubbed his back until it passed. And I understood something else about the map. It wasn't just roads and hazards. It was people. My grandfather had mapped the road distances based on Palmer's lung capacity. He'd chosen the barn for its hand pump because Nesta's relay needed flat terrain and groundwater. He'd placed the waypoints based not on geography alone, but on the specific limitations of the specific people he intended to carry. The map was a portrait of everyone he loved, drawn in roads. I got up and went to the drafting table and looked at the master sheet and saw, for the first time, the tiny penciled initials beside each route designation. PG beside the western leg, NR beside the relay point, OC beside the northern run. My initials. He'd given me the longest route because I was the youngest, the strongest, and the one he could spare least but trust most. I rolled the map carefully and carried it to the truck. Behind the seat, not in the bed. The east route nearly killed us. I took Breck and Culloden ferry. My grandfather wanted to come, but Palmer told him the truth neither of them had said aloud. You're the only one who can read the whole system. If you die on a road, the map dies. My grandfather accepted this the way he accepted bridge ratings as structural fact, not sentiment. The route ran east through the quarry district, past the limestone works, and along a ridge road that overlooked the river valley. The map noted this road as exposed, no tree cover, no ditches deep enough to hide in, and a long sight line that worked both ways. Anything on that road could see us. We could see anything on that road. We saw them at the quarry, 30, maybe more, clustered at the base of the crushing plant's conveyor belt. The belt was still running, powered by a generator that hadn't been shut down, and the rhythmic grinding of limestone against steel had drawn them like moths to a lamp. They stood in a rough semicircle, faces tilted toward the sound, bodies swaying with that same wrong physics lean. Some were in work clothes, quarry workers who'd turned on the job, standing at their own machine, listening to its voice. Don't slow down, Ferry said from the back seat. I know. The sound's holding them. If we're quiet enough, they won't care about us. He was right. And my grandfather's map had predicted this, a red note beside the quarry. Generator auto start. Sustained mechanical noise. Likely accumulation point. Pass above on Ridge Road at low speed engine noise below their threshold if RPM kept under 2,000. Confirm I kept the RPM under 2,000. We crept along the Ridge Road like a boat on still water. Below us, the clusters swayed and turned and milled, drawn to the conveyor's grinding, and not one face tilted up toward us. We were beneath their attention because a louder voice was speaking. Past the quarry, the Ridge Road dropped into a hollow. The Veldren house was at the bottom, a modular home with a metal roof and a pole barn and a vegetable garden that had been recently watered. Alive signs. I gave the relay signal. A door opened. A woman appeared, Odile Veldren, mid-30s, with a child on her hip and a man behind her using a crutch. We heard the relay last night, Odile said. You're Prosper's? His grandson. He said this would happen 2 years ago at the county fair. He told Alton, she nodded at the man on the crutch, that the roads would close and he was mapping the blue lines. Alton thought he was talking about a hobby. Alton Veldren had broken his ankle the day before, not from the dead, but from falling off a ladder while boarding windows. The irony was thick. The dead hadn't touched him. His own fear had. Can he ride? Breck asked. I can ride, Alton said. Don't talk around me. We loaded them. The child, a boy named Soren, 2 years old, stared at me with huge brown eyes and said nothing. Odile held him tight and watched the tree line. On the return, the quarry cluster had grown. 40 now, maybe 50. The conveyor was still running. But as we crested the ridge, Ferry pointed to the far end of the formation. "Look at the edge, the ones on the outside." I looked. The outer ring of figures wasn't facing the conveyor. They were facing outward, away from the sound, scanning the perimeter the way sentries scan a fence line. "They're not all doing the same thing," Ferry said. "No. The ones in the center are fixed on the sound, but the edge ones they're watching." I reported this to my grandfather that evening. He listened, made a note, and asked me to draw what I'd seen: the cluster's shape, the orientation of the edge figures, the approximate distance between the center mass and the perimeter. I drew it badly. He redrew it perfectly from my description, a clean overhead diagram that showed the pattern. "Aggregation with perimeter awareness," he said. "Like a flock, the center feeds, the edge watches. They're cooperating? They're exhibiting emergent behavior. It doesn't require cooperation. It requires each individual to follow a simple rule: go toward the sound unless a closer sound arrives. The edge ones are the farthest from the source. They respond to secondary stimuli before the center does." He wrote this on the map in a margin already dense with notes. Then he drew a small symbol I hadn't seen before, a circle with radiating lines, like a crude sun at the quarry's location. "What's that?" "A gathering point, a place to avoid." He drew 7 more across the map, at locations he predicted would produce the same effect. Running generators, flowing water, mechanical sounds that wouldn't stop. By morning, he'd redrawn every route to avoid them all. Day 6 brought the first argument. We were 23 people in a barn built for horses. The loft held 12 sleeping spaces. The floor held 11 more. The hand pump gave us water. The Callaway canning jars and the supplies we'd hauled gave us food for about 2 weeks if rationed carefully. The map's blue lines had rescued 9 more souls. A retired teacher, a gas station attendant who'd locked herself in the storage room for 2 days, a father and his 3 children who'd been driving aimlessly until Nesta's relay signal gave them a direction. The father's name was Webb Outerkirk. His wife was not with him. His oldest, a girl of 12 named Pilar, had been the one driving when we found them. Webb was sitting in the passenger seat staring at nothing. His hands were in his lap, and his eyes were dry, and his face was the face of a man who'd left the essential part of himself at some intersection he'd never find again. The argument started at the evening count. My grandfather read the names. Webb didn't respond. Nesta repeated his name. Webb looked up. "What's the point?" he said. The barn went quiet. "The point," my grandfather said, "is that you're here. I'm here because your grandson found us on a road. We were driving in circles. My wife is..." He stopped. Pilar put her hand on his arm. He shook it off. "My wife is in our house, on the floor, and I left her there." My grandfather set the clipboard down. "Yes. Don't yes me. Don't stand up there with your clipboard and your maps and pretend you know what this costs." "I'm not pretending. You're counting. You're counting us like cargo, like we're units on a manifest. Your map got us here, fine. Now what? We sit in a barn and eat a dead man's tomatoes. And wait for what?" No one else spoke. Palmer was watching my grandfather the way a man watches a bridge under load. Nesta had her hand on the clipboard. Annabeth stood near the door, arms folded. My grandfather walked down the loft ladder, slowly, each rung deliberate. He crossed to Webb and sat on the hay bale next to him. Not facing him, beside him, shoulder to shoulder, the way men sit who've known each other 40 years, except they'd known each other 4 days. Virgil Calloway is sitting in his kitchen, my grandfather said. I wired his doors shut. I used his barn. I'm eating his wife's tomatoes. I've been mapping the roads around this town for 40 years. And the man who let me park in his driveway every spring to check the Dwyer Road culvert is 30 yards away in his own house. And he's not Virgil anymore. And I sealed him in there because taking him out would have cost resources I needed for the living. Webb was silent. The map doesn't make it cheaper. The map makes it possible, that's all. Possible to reach people and bring them somewhere and count their names so the names don't disappear. That's the entire architecture. If you want to grieve, grieve. You should grieve. But answer when I call your name, because the moment I stop calling it, you stop mattering to the list. And the list is the only thing between us and becoming what Virgil became. Virgil didn't become that because nobody called his name. No, but I'll be damned if anyone in this barn does. Webb looked at the floor. Pilar leaned into her father's side. He didn't shake her off this time. I'll answer, he said. Don't ask me to be grateful. I'm not asking you to be grateful. I'm asking you to be counted. My grandfather climbed back up the ladder and picked up the clipboard and read the remaining names, and every voice answered, and the barn was quiet afterward except for Palmer's cough, and the windmill's creak, and the sound of a pencil on vellum as the map was redrawn in the lamplight. Later, alone with me in the loft, my grandfather sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes closed. He's right about one thing, he said. The map makes it feel like a system. Systems feel clean. This isn't clean. You're doing what you can. He opened his eyes. I'm doing what I prepared for. That's different. Preparing means you saw it coming, and you chose to draw lines instead of telling people to run. Every line on that map is a decision I made before the cost was real. Now the cost is real, and the lines are all I have. He picked up the pencil. The vellum crinkled. The lantern hissed. Get some sleep, Oren. I need you on the south route at 5. The south route was the one my grandfather had saved for last, and I understood why the moment I saw his annotations. The primary road ran through downtown Brannock Main Street, the traffic light, the Methodist church with its open doors. The blue alternate looped far south through agricultural flatland, adding 11 miles to a 4-mile drive. The red notes on both routes were dense with warnings, each one a small horror compressed into his engineer's shorthand. Main Street, multiple accumulation points, church lot, hardware store generator, gas station compressor, auto cycling. Avoid, Blue South Marshfield Crossroads, collision debris, 12 plus, observed Tuesday. Reroute via Cauley Drain if passable. Cauley Drain, 200 yards unpaved, soft at midpoint, impassable above 1-inch rainfall. Check sky before committing. I checked the sky. Clear, I committed. Nesta rode with me. She'd been monitoring the relay for 5 days straight, sleeping in fragments. And she needed out of the barn the way a diver needs up. She sat with the clipboard on her knees and the radio handset in her lap. And she watched the fields roll by with the attention of a woman cataloging everything. Who are we collecting? I asked. Dallas Penn. She's at the old feed mill south of Brannock. She transmitted at 3 this morning a single burst, just her name and location. Then nothing. Why nothing? Battery, probably. Or she heard something and went quiet. The Cauley Drain was a shallow ditch running behind a row of equipment sheds, just wide enough for the truck's tires. I drove it at walking speed with the windows down, listening. The sheds were sheet metal, rust-streaked, open on one end. Inside the third shed, standing in the shadow, a figure. I saw it for 2 seconds as we passed a woman in a feed store apron, motionless, head tilted at an angle that no living neck would hold. "Keep going," Nesta said. She'd seen it too. At the feed mill, the parking lot was empty. The building was a low concrete structure with a loading dock and a rusted sign. The bay doors were closed. A side entrance had been barricaded from within. I could see the edge of a shelf unit pressed against the glass. I gave the signal. Silence. I waited. A face appeared at the barricaded window, small, weathered, frightened. Then the shelf scraped back and the door opened 6 inches. "Dallas Penn?" "Who's asking?" "Oren Caldecott, Prosper's grandson." The door opened. Dallas Penn was 60-something, thin-armed, wearing coveralls and work boots. She carried a fire extinguisher like a club. "I've been here since Monday," she said. "I heard them outside Tuesday night. Sounded like they were testing the bay doors, not pounding, just pressing, leaning against them. The doors flexed, but held." She'd rationed a case of bottled water and a bag of dog kibble she'd found in the break room. She was shaking and dehydrated, and she climbed into the truck with the careful dignity of a woman who refused to be carried. "Your grandfather," she said. "He told me once that the southbound drainage wouldn't flood if you hugged the east bank. Was he right?" "He's been right about everything so far." He was always right about the roads. People thought it was obsessive. It was devotion. On the return, we were a mile from the barn when the truck's engine coughed. Fuel gauge said a quarter tank. It coughed again, and I realized the gauge was lying. The sender had been unreliable for months, and I'd meant to fix it, and I hadn't, because I'd been living above a garage and telling myself I had time. The engine died 400 yards from the barn's gate. The road was straight, the yard visible ahead. I could see the windmill, the barn, the wired-shut house. "We walk," Nesta said. "It's 400 yards." Then we walked quickly and quietly. Dallas climbed out without a word. The 3 of us walked the last quarter-mile in the gravel shoulder, feet crunching, ears open. Behind us, on the road, nothing moved. Ahead, the barn door opened, and Breck came out with the shotgun. "Truck die?" "Fuel sender lied." "Palmer can fix it." "Can he?" "He's been fixing county trucks since Nixon. He can fix anything with an engine and a complaint." We entered the barn. My grandfather counted. 24 now. He made his mark. Nesta added Dallas to the clipboard. Dallas sat on a hay bale and drank water and said, "That dog kibble tasted like sawdust and salt. Your grandfather's tomatoes taste like heaven." She was crying when she said it, and laughing, and both at the same time, and I thought, this is what the map does. It brings people to a place where they can cry and laugh about dog kibble. And that's enough. That has to be enough. On the 8th morning, my grandfather couldn't stand. I found him on his hay bale, legs hanging over the edge, both hands gripping the frame. His face was gray. Not turned gray, human gray, the color of a body doing math it couldn't solve. "It's the hip," he said. "It's been going for 2 years, needed a replacement. Wasn't going to get one in time." "In time for what?" "For this." He gestured around the barn. I knew I had a window. Months, probably. The hip would go, and when it went, I'd be a liability. "That's why I needed you, Oren." I stared at him. "You're the legs. You were always the legs. I'm the map. Palmer's the mechanical. Nesta's the signal. You're the one who drives the routes, makes the pickups, carries the living from point to point. That's your piece of the system." "You didn't tell me." "I told you everything I told you in the order I told it. The map was first. The people were second. My hip was last, because my hip doesn't matter until the legs work. Palmer appeared at the loft ladder, breathing hard from the climb. He looked at my grandfather, looked at the hands on the frame, and said nothing for 10 seconds. "I'll build you a cane," Palmer said. "There's oak in the pole barn." "I don't need a cane. I need the south blue rerouted. The Collie drain is soft from yesterday's traffic. If we get rain, it's impassable, and the south route is dead." Palmer sat on the opposite bale. "So draw a new one. I need to see it. I need to walk the ground." "You can't walk?" "Then drive me." I drove him. Palmer rode in the back, carving the cane from a spoke of white oak with a folding knife. My grandfather sat in the passenger seat with the map and a pair of binoculars and directed me down roads he knew by name and grade, pointing at drainage patterns, slope angles, the way water collected in a low spot that would become a swamp by Thursday. He found the new route in 90 minutes. A gravel service road that ran behind the water district's pump station, connecting to a farm lane that looped south and rejoined the primary road past the Marshfield intersection. He'd known this road existed. He'd walked it years ago. But he hadn't included it on the map because the lane crossed private property, the Overholser farm, and the Overholsers had posted their gates with trespass warnings. "Overholser's dead," Palmer said from the back seat. "We don't know that. His cattle are loose. They've been loose since Tuesday. Overholser never let those cattle loose in 40 years of farming." My grandfather was quiet. Then he penciled the new route onto the vellum in blue, and he drew a red circle at the Overholser gate. And beside it he wrote, "Confirmed unoccupied. Respect the fences when the world comes back." That note cracked something inside me. In the middle of a collapse, with the dead walking and the living running, my grandfather wrote a note about respecting a dead man's fences. Because the map wasn't just a tool, it was a covenant. It recorded obligations along with roots. It carried the names of the land's people even after the people were gone. When we returned, Annabeth met us at the barn door. Her face was drawn. "Palmer, June Pettigrew's breathing is wrong." Palmer limped to the corner where June lay on a blanket. Earl knelt beside her, holding her hand. Palmer listened to her chest with his ear pressed flat, the way mechanics listen to engines. "Pneumonia," he said. "Left lung. Can you?" "I'm not a doctor, Earl. But she needs antibiotics, and we don't have antibiotics." My grandfather, leaning on the new cane, looked at the map. He traced a line to the Brannock pharmacy on Main Street, through downtown, through the accumulation zone. "No," I said. "You marked that red. Multiple gathering points. Church, hardware, gas station." I marked it red for vehicles. A vehicle through downtown draws every cluster in a 6-block radius. But a person on foot at night, moving slowly, the map has a pedestrian route through the alleys. He found it. A dotted line I'd never noticed, running behind Main Street through service alleys and loading docks, past dumpsters and fire escapes, connecting the south end to the pharmacy's back door. "I drew this in February," he said. "I drew it because Palmer's lungs are bad, and the nearest antibiotics are in town, and I knew someday we'd need them." He looked at me. I looked at the dotted line. "I'll go tonight," I said. "You'll go tonight," he confirmed. And his hand, holding the pencil, was perfectly still. The alleys behind Main Street smelled like rainwater and rust and the particular sweetness of a dumpster that hadn't been emptied in 8 days, in June heat. I moved through them at a pace my grandfather had specified. "Slower than you think, slower than that. If your feet make rhythm, you're walking too fast. Rhythm is a human signature. Arrhythmia is everything else. Wind settling, debris. Walk like debris. I walked like debris. The map was folded to the downtown quadrant, small enough to read by the penlight clipped to my collar. Each turn was marked. Service alley behind the hardware store, left at the dumpster corral. Through the gap between the barber shop and the vacant storefront gap, exactly 31 inches. He'd measured it. He'd written 31 inches. Turned sideways. Then along the loading dock behind the bank. The moon was a quarter crescent, enough to see shapes, not enough to see detail. I didn't want detail. Detail would mean seeing faces I recognized on bodies that weren't people anymore. At the barbershop gap I heard them, not close across Main Street in the church parking lot. The sound was the one Maeve had described. A wet, guttural, intermittent vocalization, like a throat trying to form a word it no longer understood. Multiple voices, a congregation of the broken-voiced gathered at a church, following a habit their muscles remembered after their minds had dissolved. I turned sideways and slid through the 31-inch gap. The bricks scraped my chest and back. My grandfather had written, "Exhale to fit. Pack nothing wider than your shoulders." I'd packed nothing. I carried a canvas bag, a pry bar, and the map. The pry bar was for the pharmacy's back door. The bag was for whatever I could carry. The map was for getting home. Behind the bank, the alley opened into a service court shared by the pharmacy, the bank, and a title insurance office. The court was dark. A security light on the bank wall had burned out or been broken. Nothing moved. The pharmacy's back door was steel with a deadbolt. I set the pry bar against the frame and pulled. The wood splintered. The sound was a single sharp crack that split the night like a branch breaking, and I froze. And the guttural chorus across the street shifted, not louder, but different. A directional change. Several voices turning toward the origin of the sound, the way flowers turn toward the sun. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The voices settled back into their ambient pattern. They hadn't locked on. The sound had been too brief, too singular. My grandfather's note. Single impulse sounds under 1 second dissipate attention. Sustained or repeated sounds accumulated. Never make the same noise twice in the same minute. I entered the pharmacy through the splintered frame. Inside, dark, air-conditioned cool that was fading as the backup power died, rows of products I navigated by touch. The prescription counter was at the rear. I climbed over it and found the antibiotic shelf by reading labels with the penlight held between my teeth. Amoxicillin, azithromycin, doxycycline. I took everything. I filled the canvas bag with bottles, then added ibuprofen, acetaminophen, bandages, antiseptic, hydrocortisone, glucose tablets, and a box of surgical gloves. Palmer had given me a list. I followed it precisely. On the way out, I passed the front window. Main Street was visible through the glass. The traffic light was still cycling green, yellow, red, illuminating the road in 3-second intervals. In the green phase, I saw the church parking lot. They were arranged in loose rows, facing the church doors, 50 or more, some standing, some on their knees. The posture of worship, performed by bodies whose spirits had been replaced by a drive that found its expression in the last gesture the muscles had learned. They'd come to church on a Sunday, and they'd stayed. And the sound they made was the sound of a hymn dismantled into its raw components, pitch without melody, breath without words. I watched for 3 seconds. Green, yellow, red. In the dark, I shouldered the bag and walked back through the 31-inch gap and the dumpster corral and the service alleys, walking like debris, and the night held its breath around me. The map led me home. Palmer started June on amoxicillin within the hour. By morning, her fever had broken enough for her to drink broth. Earl held the cup to her lips, and his hands were steady now. And he looked at me with an expression I'd seen on my grandfather's face. The face of a man who understood that a pencil line on vellum had kept someone he loved alive. Day 14. The count stood at 31. The barn was full. The map had delivered 7 more people in the second week, a couple from the Ridge Road. A man found sleeping in his car at the quarry turnoff. A woman and her mother-in-law, who'd been hiding in a root cellar and heard our relay signal. But on day 14, my grandfather unrolled the master map across the barn floor and gathered everyone around it. And he said something I wasn't prepared for. "We're leaving." The barn went silent. The barn was never the destination. It was a collection point. The map has 4 collection points. This is the first. The destination is the grain elevator on Dwyer Road. "That's where you found me," Nesta said. "Because I chose it 3 years ago. The elevator has reinforced concrete walls, 200,000 bushels of stored wheat, a diesel backup generator with a buried 4,000-gallon fuel tank, a deep well, and roof access with a 360-degree sight line. It's the most defensible civilian structure in the county." "You planned this," I said. "The whole thing. The barn was a staging point. The barn was where I could receive people. The elevator is where they can live." Webb Oderkirk, who had barely spoken since our argument, stood up. "How do 31 people get from here to there?" The roads are mapped." My grandfather tapped the vellum. "I've drawn a convoy route that avoids every accumulation point identified in the last 2 weeks. It uses the Overholser farm lane, the Water District service road, and the East Drainage easement. Total distance, 9.4 miles. Total estimated travel time at convoy speed, 47 minutes. We go at 3 in the morning when observation data suggests lowest activity." "Observation data," Webb said. "Oren has driven 6 routes and recorded activity levels at 20-minute intervals. Nesta has monitored relay reports from 3 outlying contacts. Palmer has documented sound response patterns from the barn perimeter. This is not a guess. This is a survey." I watched the room absorb this. 31 people, most of whom had arrived terrified and half-starved. Being told that a 79-year-old man with a bad hip had engineered their survival as a series of measured, annotated, ground-truthed steps. And the next step was a 9-mile night drive to a grain elevator he'd selected 3 years before the world ended. Annabeth spoke first. "I trust the map." "I trust Prosper," Palmer said, and coughed. "Same thing," Annabeth said, and the room almost smiled. We prepared for 2 days. Every vehicle was fueled from the cans we'd stockpiled. Palmer fixed the truck's fuel sender with a piece of copper wire and a prayer. Breck reinforced the Daimler truck's tailgate for passengers. Ferry checked every tire, every belt, every fluid level. My grandfather spent those 2 days at the drafting table, refining the convoy route. He drew it 6 times, each version tighter than the last. The final version had turn-by-turn instructions printed in block letters large enough to read by flashlight. With a timing column, the exact minute each vehicle should reach each waypoint. "If you're late to a waypoint, you stop and wait," he said. "You don't speed up. Speed makes noise. Noise draws them. The schedule is built on the quietest possible speed, and quiet is more important than fast." He distributed the route sheets. 1 per vehicle, 5 vehicles, 31 people. "Oren leads," he said. "I ride with Oren. Annabeth second, Ferry third, Breck fourth. Nesta rear with the relay in case we separate. And if we separate? Kiefer asked. Follow the route sheet to the elevator. Every turn is on the paper. You don't need me or Oren. You need the map. He said it with a simplicity that cut through everything. The map was transferable. The knowledge was on the page. If he died on the road, the blue line survived. If I died, the route sheet survived. The system was bigger than any one person. And that was the whole point. And that had always been the whole point. At 2 a.m. on day 16, we loaded. My grandfather climbed into the truck and arranged the master map on his lap and clicked his pen light on and looked at me. Drive the line, Oren. I drove the line. 5 vehicles, 31 lives, 9.4 miles of roads he'd walked in his orange truck, mapped on his door and sawhorse table, annotated in his crabbed hand with notes about every culvert, every gate, every 31-inch gap in the known world. The convoy moved through the dark like a held breath. I drove at 22 miles per hour, the speed my grandfather's calculations specified as the maximum that kept engine noise below the threshold he'd established from 2 weeks of observation. Behind me, the 4 vehicles followed at 10-second intervals, headlights off, guided by taillights and route sheets and trust. The first waypoint was the Overholser Gate. I reached it at 3:07, 1 minute ahead of schedule. I stopped, killed the engine, and listened. Wind in the grass, cattle lowing somewhere in the dark, the loose herd, still alive, still wandering. No other sound. Open the gate, my grandfather said. Lift and swing. It squeaks at the hinge lift it higher than you think. I lifted it higher than I thought. It didn't squeak. The convoy rolled through. I closed it behind the last vehicle and latched it. Because the map said to. Because respecting the fences was part of the covenant. The Overholser lane was gravel, loose enough to crunch. My grandfather had noted this. Gravel lane reduced to 12 miles per hour. Tire noise on loose stone carries 200+ yards in still air. Accept the delay. I accepted the delay. The lane curved through pasture and connected to the Water District service road, paved, smooth, silent under the tires. We accelerated back to 22. The night was moonless now, overcast, and I drove by memory and by the pen light on the map and by the feel of the road through the wheel. At waypoint 3, the junction with the East Drainage easement, I saw them. A line of figures on the road ahead, not a cluster, a line. They were walking single file along the center stripe, heading south, away from us. 7 or 8 of them, spaced at irregular intervals, each moving with that mechanical deliberation. Where they were going, I didn't know. They moved with what I can only describe as purpose, not intelligence, but direction. Something ahead of them was pulling. Stop, my grandfather said. I stopped. The convoy stopped behind me. Silence. The figures continued walking, unaware of us, their footsteps inaudible at this distance. They're following the road, my grandfather said. Not tracking a sound, following the road itself. The surface is easier to walk on than the field. He made a note. Even now, even here. Easement ditch, he said. Oren, take the truck off the road to the left. The ditch is dry and firm for 80 yards. It'll put you past them. Go now, while they're still moving away. I dropped the left wheels into the ditch. The truck tilted. The suspension groaned. I crept forward at 5 miles per hour, the ditch bottom rough but solid, and the line of walking dead passed to our right at a distance of 40 feet. And not one turned its head, because we were below the road surface, and our engine was just above idle, and the wind was in our faces, carrying our sound behind us. Vehicle by vehicle, the convoy followed me through the ditch. Annabeth, Ferry, Breck, Nesta, each one tilting, groaning, recovering, passing the line. The last figure in the walking column paused, and my grandfather whispered, "Hold." And Nesta's vehicle stopped in the ditch, and the figure stood still for 5 seconds, and then resumed walking. And Nesta rolled past, and it was over, and I was shaking so hard the wheel rattled in my hands. The grain elevator appeared at 341, a concrete tower against the overcast sky, monolithic, industrial, ugly, and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. My grandfather directed me to the east access road, past the truck scale, to the personnel door on the south side. He produced a key from his pocket. "Where did you get that?" "Nesta gave it to me 5 years ago." I looked at Nesta's vehicle in the mirror. She was already stepping out, clipboard in hand. My grandfather unlocked the door. The interior smelled of grain dust and diesel and enclosed air. He stepped inside, flicked a light switch, and the diesel generator kicked to life. Somewhere in the building's guts, and fluorescent lights buzzed on in the main bay, and 31 people walked into a reinforced concrete structure with water and food and power. And my grandfather stood by the door and touched each person's shoulder as they passed and said their name. Every name, in order. From the clipboard he'd had Nesta keep since day one. When the last person entered, he looked at me. His hip was failing. His hand on the cane was white. His eyes were clear. "Close the door, Oren, then open it again tomorrow." That was 11 years ago. The grain elevator still stands. Its concrete walls have never been breached. The diesel generator ran for 14 months before Palmer and Ferry converted the system to a wind turbine they built from salvaged parts. The well still gives water. The wheat ran out in year 3, but by then, we'd planted the fields around the elevator, guided by routes my grandfather mapped for foot traffic between the tower and the tillable land. He died in the second winter. His hip finally locked, and then his heart followed, as if the body had been waiting for permission. He died at the drafting table with a pencil in his hand and a half-finished map of a route he'd never walk. I rolled it up and put it in the tube with my name on it. We're 67 now. People still arrive. They find us because the relay still transmits Nesta's work, carried on by Maeve, who learned the frequencies the way my grandfather learned the roads. They find us because the blue lines are posted at every waypoint, laminated and nailed to fence posts and gate frames, readable by anyone with a flashlight and the willingness to follow a line drawn by a man they never met. I still drive the routes. I check the culverts. I measure the water depth at the Volmer Ford every week, the way he did. I annotate the margins when a road changes. I draw the gathering point symbols when a new sound source appears. The map is never finished. It's only current. Prosper Caldecott mapped every road around our town, and when the dead arrived, his map became our only escape. But escape was never the point. Connection was. Every blue line was a hand extended. Every red note was a danger absorbed so someone else wouldn't have to. He drew us home.